Wife and Mistress, a novella, written by Melinda Michelle. Prologue, The Funeral. The wrenching scream that echoed throughout the cemetery could likely be heard for miles. It sounded like a painfully wounded, trapped, hurt, and scared animal. But it wasn't an animal. It was a woman. A grieving woman. A scared woman. A woman with regret. Sanaa King wept loudly over her mother's shiny burgundy casket as her 3 siblings pulled her away in order to let the groundskeepers do their jobs and lower the body into the ground. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Sanaa was no stranger to death. In fact, they had lost their father to an unexpected stroke just 5 years before. Her mother had been the matriarch of their family, and now that burden fell to her. It was a title she didn't want. It was a title she couldn't handle, because the title she currently carried took up all her time, energy, and sanity. Wife and Mistress. Monica King's funeral took place on a bright spring day in Tallahassee, Florida. Birds chirped cheerily in the sunlight as a cool, gentle breeze rustled through the blooming magnolia trees. It swept briskly around the group gathered for the graveside burial, jostling the freshly coiffed hairdos of several women present. The serene atmosphere of the cemetery contrasted sharply with the grief-stricken visages of Monica King's loved ones. They gripped hands as they trudged somberly through the maze of headstones and freshly cut bright green grass. The liveliness of spring seemed like an affront to the devastation felt by those in attendance. Least of all, the heartbroken children Monica had left behind. One by one, the entourage of family, friends, co-workers, loved ones, and acquaintances piled into their vehicles to head to the next process in the fanfare and hoopla of death, loss, and burial. Funerals were for the living. The dead no longer had any cares of this world. A large, freshly waxed black limousine transported the 4 siblings, 1 spouse, 1 girlfriend, and 1 fiancé. The ride to the repast was filled with silence, heartache, sobs, and regret. An hour into the repast, everything was playing out as one would expect at an event of this manner. Some laughter, some chatter, some condolences, some dives down memory lane, and lots of eating. The great room at the community center was filled with long white tables and metal chairs. People moved busily about the space, catching up with those they hadn't seen in a while, all dressed in their Sunday best. Some huddled together, gossiping about the funeral and what they would have done differently. Others, reminded of the brevity of life, as so typically the case at funerals, gathered to make well-intentioned yet ill-fated plans to get together soon. Meanwhile, the out-of-towners inconspicuously glanced at their wristwatches, counting down the minutes until they could leave to go back to their normal routines and grieve in their own way. Monica's 2 sisters, Janice and Rose, had thrown down for their sister's homegoing service. Despite their sorrow, they trusted no one else to man the kitchen or be responsible for feeding the mass of loved ones that would attend their sister's interment. Both sisters were busy playing hostesses, so the children were left to themselves to enjoy the final moments of the fairy tale before reality set in. Tomorrow, the calls would stop, the visitors would cease, the condolences would disappear, and the real world without their mother would begin to manifest. It was a space they had no clue how to navigate, but would have to learn little by little. Sanaa leaned on her husband's shoulder as he kept a protective arm around her. She sat silently, gazing glassy-eyed at nothing, an effect of the anti-anxiety medication her husband had given her to help her keep calm. A medium-sized beauty with caramel skin, Sanaa rocked a blonde and black afro that framed a sweet face with bashful brown eyes and full lips. In her arms slept her baby girl. The 3-year-old was the spitting image of her mother. Sanaa was grateful for this roll of the genetic dice because, to be frank, She honestly wasn't sure which of her lovers was her child's true father. Her husband, Victor, 10 years her senior, was a handsome man that aged gracefully and cemented the adage, black don't crack. At 45, he was solidly built, standing at 5 feet 11 inches. His shade of brown matched the pecans that fell to the ground, and his clean-shaven head glistened like it had been buffed. Victor had been in love with Sanaa for many years, and for most of them, she had played hard to get. Sanaa refused to give him the time of day. So as a result, Victor dated other women, but they mostly served as a distraction. Victor's heart refused to let him concede defeat, so he pursued Sanaa persistently, even as she continued to turn him down. Then, one day, out of the blue, as if an answer to his prayer, she came to him and finally accepted his request to take her to dinner. 3 months later, she was his wife. 6 months after that, Sanaa discovered she was pregnant with their beautiful daughter, Zora. He could not have been happier to see his dream life manifest into his reality. Yet today, his heart ached for his wife and her siblings. They were a close bunch, so he had high hopes that they would successfully navigate their newfound status of being orphans. Bakari was the second oldest at 32 years old. He was tall, well-built, and bore their mother's lighter skin tone. He rolled his dark brown eyes and bit back a persistent urge to cuss. He was irritated because his girlfriend of 8 years was doing the absolute most. Yes, he was grieving, but he was also stressed. Since his mother's passing, Melanie had been stuck to him like glue, hovering incessantly with concern about his well-being. He was fine. He didn't need her breathing down his neck, asking him every 5 minutes if he was okay. Melanie was mother to his 5- and 8-year-old boys. She had been in his life forever, it seemed. His siblings treated her like family, which, essentially, she was. Which brought him back to her constant pestering for him to marry her and make an honest woman out of her. He was tired of hearing her nag about them shacking up all this time. Ironically, only his mother's death granted him a reprieve from her pressuring him to make decisions he wasn't ready for. Wasn't there some scripture in the Bible about a nagging woman and a man running to the corner of the roof to get away from it? Bakari gently pushed Melanie off of him and moved to stand up. "I need some air," he said in his smooth voice. "You want me to come with you?" she asked eagerly. "No," he snapped. Melanie shrunk back, visibly embarrassed by his careless tone. She could feel the entire table's eyes on them. His siblings looked on in shock, but remained quiet. "I just need a minute. I'll be back." Melanie dropped her head as he walked out. Sanaa and Zaire, the baby boy, exchanged a look. Ameris rolled her light brown eyes. She thought Melanie had to be the stupidest woman on the planet. There was no way she would take that type of behavior from any man. Shoot, her men were married and treated her with more respect than Bakari gave her. With just 20 months separating them, Ameris and Bakari were the closest of the siblings. They shared their light complexion. Ameris was petite, with just enough curves to garner attention whenever she wanted it, which was always. At 31, Ameris was selfish, self-centered, self-indulging, and unapologetic about it. While she preferred the company of married men, she had to admit it felt kind of lonely not having someone there to hold her as she grieved her mother. None of the local married men she dealt with could attend, as her mother had been well known amongst several Tallahassee circles. Conversely, none of her out-of-town boos were available on such short notice to get away for the weekend. Inwardly, Ameris sighed. Such was the life she led, so she'd deal. Rounding out the King clan was 28-year-old Zaire. Boasting a caramel complexion and a slender build, Zaire favored his oldest sister, Sanaa. But he also had their father's height and stood over 6 feet tall. His fiancée, Alana, reached for his hand. This was her first time being around his family. She hated that she was meeting them under these circumstances, but was grateful to be there with him at such a vulnerable time. Outside, Bakari paced along the sidewalk with his phone pressed to his ear. He was so caught up in making excuses, he didn't initially see the two people hastily approaching the Jack McLean Community Center, where the repast was being held. He stood with his back to the door and looked out at the playground, where several children played with carefree abandon, a bittersweet reminder that, despite the circumstances, life did go on. He sighed and turned his attention back to his phone call. "Babe, I know I've been gone for a week already, but I'm trying to get this stuff handled. The job is just really crazy right now." "You left me here with a newborn, Bakari," the voice on the phone replied tersely. "I need help." "I'll be home as soon as I can. I promise." "You said no more week-long trips until the baby was 3 months old. You promised." Bakari rolled his eyes and blew out a harsh breath. Great. More nagging, he thought. This was the last thing he needed right now. "Look, I can't help that my job is more demanding," he defended. "We need this money, because as you keep reminding me, we have a newborn." Bakari heard the voice on the other end of the line scoff and braced himself for the tongue-lashing he knew was imminent. "You know what, Negro?" the woman started. Then suddenly, he heard the line go dead. Staring at the phone, Bakari shook his head. He sighed heavily and prepared to call her back, but before he could, the commotion coming from the parking lot stole his attention. "Please don't do this, please," he heard a woman's voice beg. "You're drunk. Let's just go home. Don't do this. Not now, not today." Bakari turned to see a woman frantically pulling on another woman, whose determined face conveyed she was hell-bent on carrying out whatever plan she had going on in her head. The woman barreled straight ahead towards the entrance and snatched the doors open. Bakari frowned, put his phone in his pocket, and headed back to the repast. Inside, everyone looked up at the sound of the commotion at the door. "Now get off me! Get off me!" The determined woman Bakari had seen outside jerked her hand away from her friend and shook herself loose. "I don't care that their mama just died," she announced loudly. "My mama did too, and because of their trifling mother, I had to grow up without parents." That last slurred statement made everything in the room pause. Sanaa looked up. "What the hell?" she muttered. Ameris, ever the fighter, was already up removing her earrings. Knowing his sister's tendency to throw punches first and ask questions later, Zaire jumped up and grabbed her. Disturbed by the commotion surrounding her, Sanaa came out of her fog, gave her sleeping child to her husband, and stood up. "Excuse you? Who do you think you are, coming up in here all disrespectful like you ain't got no home training?" Sanaa questioned as she snapped out of her prescription-induced haze. "Come on, girl, let's go," the friend of the intruder pleaded in a low voice. "I'm not about to fight all these people." The word fight set Ameris off again. She snatched away from Zaire, and as she took 2 steps forward, she stepped right out of her black red-bottom stilettos. By this time, Bakari had made it inside. Ameris saw her partner in crime and gave him a nod. He immediately moved toward his sister. He hadn't heard any of what the irate, inebriated woman had been saying, but he knew it couldn't be good if it had Ameris ready to throw hands. "Come on, Ameris, chill out," Zaire said as he firmly gripped his sister's arms. "Somebody better make this make sense right now, otherwise she is about to get dragged. Our mama just died, and she gonna come up in here with this foolishness," Ameris snapped. "Why are you here?" Bakari asked, now standing within arm's length of the 2 intruders. The drunk woman gave one final yank from her friend, who finally gave in, throwing her hands up in a gesture of surrender. She backed up and folded her arms. If she was determined to do this, then so be it. Maybe unleashing the truth might finally do some good. With a heated glare, the inebriated woman launched into her explanation. Even though her speech was slightly slurred, her words were clearly understood. I'm here because ding dong, the witch is dead, and now we can all know the truth. At that insult, Sanaa lunged, ready to jump on the girl, but Zaire grabbed her. Victor passed their still sleeping daughter to Melanie as he stood up to get his wife and regain control of this quickly dissolving situation. Okay, state your business and leave, ma'am, Victor stated in a commanding voice. You've already made a fool of yourself. At least don't let it be in vain. Say what you need to say, then leave. All my life I had to live in the shadows and in shame, never being able to tell the world who I really was. Your mother convinced my father not to acknowledge me. I am your father's second-born child, she confessed as tears ran down her face. Her hurt was palpable, but she continued. Let me know when y'all won't do the swab and I'll meet you there. I don't know why your mama tried so hard to hide the scandal when the whole city knows her and her sisters were infamous for being with somebody else's man. Why you think your daddy stepped out with my mama in the first place? Eyes began to shift towards the kitchen as gasps and mumblings permeated the room. Monica's two sisters stood stock still in shock and silence. What could they say? They knew the young woman was telling the truth. They had known about her since before she was born. The room got so quiet, all that could be heard was the faint sound of children playing outside, since the door had been left wide open. And from what the streets are saying, her children are following in her footsteps, the drunk woman said with a smirk. Sanaa's heart dropped into the pit of her stomach. She wasn't about to let this woman drop another bomb that could devastate her marriage. All right, now that's enough, she said forcefully, pointing her finger at the woman. You said your piece. Now get out. The woman smiled at Sanaa with a menacing confidence that had her backing down. Oh, sure thing, sis. The woman smirked one last time, then turned on her heel and strolled out, with her friend scurrying behind her. As soon as the door shut behind them, the room erupted in a flurry of frantic reactions. Bakari followed the women outside. As he caught up to them, he heard them talking. Now what was the point of that, Sade? What was the point? The friend asked, frustrated. The point was to tell the truth, Sade responded defiantly. All I'm saying is there was a better way to do that, and definitely a better time. Psst, whatever. There was a better time to acknowledge me, too. The friend just shook her head. Yo, hold up! Bakari yelled out. The women stopped and turned towards him. Immediately, Sade's friend went on the defensive and stood in front of her. What proof do you have that you belong to our father? Bakari inquired when he caught up to them. Sade blinked at him incredulously. You mean other than my DNA and my mother's deathbed confession? He frowned. What? Yeah, she told me the truth about my daddy before she died when I was a little girl, Sade explained. She also told me it would be wise to keep my mouth shut, because your mom would never let me have a relationship with my father. At that revelation, Bakari frowned even deeper. Are you serious? He asked disbelievingly. Sade simply nodded in response. Inside, the aftermath of Sade's truth bomb was still unfolding. Ameris turned to her older sister with a questioning glare. Is it true? Sanaa could only shrug. I don't know, she responded simply. It sounded like an excuse, but it was the honest truth. Zaire's mind was reeling. He didn't know what to think. All this information was just too much to process. With tears streaming down his face, he turned to those he knew had the answers. His aunts. He let go of Ameris and walked over to them. Of the 4 king siblings, Zaire had been closest to their father. They'd had a bond like no other. To say this information was devastating was a massive understatement. Is it true? Zaire asked as he stared down the two women who had known his mother better than anyone. Silence. Is it true? He demanded forcefully, which was completely out of his character. Yes, his Aunt Janice answered reluctantly. Zaire blinked back tears and swallowed hard. How much of it? He asked shakily, and he heard his Aunt Rose sigh. Enough of it, she told him. The crowd gasped. Victor just shook his head and muttered to himself. Weddings and funerals. Always a ticking time bomb for family drama.